Okay. And welcome to you online. I didn't acknowledge you earlier. Thanks for showing up, even virtually. So we've been covering this book. It's Fundamentals of Tibetan Buddhism. It's written by a dear friend and Vajra's sister, Rebecca Novick. Incredible dear friend of mine who's just a wonderful practitioner. What she did was she sat down with some incredible lamas, including Venerable Geshe Sultan Geltsen up here. And she sought to give us a map of really what is it like to encompass these vast teachings in a way that is accessible. What's the outline? How does it work? And what's the language that we can use? And I think she did an incredible job. It really touches upon and gives a framework of the path and a view of Tibetan Buddhism and how it all works and fits together. So it's concise. It's not meant to be expansive like when we go into any of the points. It goes through like the Noble Eightfold Path. You've got a few sentences, it's this, it's that. But her goal was really to provide a framework, because we can get really lost in these sutras. You know, people, when they start to get into Buddhism, it's like, well, this sutra, that sutra, is it Zen? Is it, Theravada Buddhism, Hinayana, Mahayana? There's this Heart Sutra. There's, what is this that we're doing? What does it mean to be a Vajra practitioner, a practitioner of Vajrayana? What is that? And what she did is she just took this whole path of the Tibetan and she enveloped the foundational pieces and then gave the framework. And so it's been a great text, and hopefully as we've gone through it, you found it meaningful. So far, we have gone through like the Four Noble Truths, the Wheel of Life, karma, taking refuge. And so now we have this sort of context of the nature of how mind arises. And we're on chapter 8, which is the wisdom of emptiness. So a light read, the nature of reality itself. And this time, normally, I kind of just go through and give my commentary to give a little more depth to it. But because we've talked about the nature of reality quite often, and you've received a lot of my impression on that, I thought we're going to read some of these words that she's taken from these masters and see if we can add a bit to it. That way you'll receive a different perspective as well as some very traditional examples. So I think it'll be quite meaningful. The wisdom of emptiness begins with a wonderful quote by Nagarjuna. All things are realized when emptiness is realized. Nothing is realized when emptiness is not realized. And this is, when we look at how things exist, ultimately this is the goal. This is the liberation, when we recognize our true nature, the nature of things. Until that point, whatever we have achieved or know, it's always contaminated, it's always filtered, and so it's not pure. So, here we begin. Emptiness or selflessness is the most popular translation of the Sanskrit word shunyata. But other translations include suchness or space, sometimes voidness. The concept of emptiness is found in all schools of Buddhism, and its understanding is considered crucial to spiritual development. In the West, emptiness implies a lack of something, but this is not the case amongst Buddhists. As An Watts wrote, emptiness is not a void to be filled, but a window to be looked through. That's really how we experience these things. This nature phenomena. Buddhists do not regard emptiness as a philosophy or point of view, but as the very condition of all phenomena. Emptiness or selflessness is nothing less than the way in which everything actually exists. So that's the goal. The basic working hypothesis in Buddhism is, if I can actually see things as they exist, as I perceive and experience myself as I exist, there's no way anger, resentment, jealousy, mental afflictions can arise. They're all dependent upon misperception. So the very nature of realizing this, it's beyond, there's no karma, there's nothing that's going to be created that's going to be limiting or harmful, because we would see its nature. It's the way things exist. The nature of reality itself that points to the interrelatedness and interdependence of everything in the universe. The line of reasoning goes as follows. There is nothing in the world that can exist independently of other phenomena. Everything that exists does so dependently. Therefore, everything is empty of independent existence. So this is always a good starting point. When we bring up emptiness, it's done so carefully, very carefully. There's a lot of room for misperception, misunderstanding, which actually causes a great deal of damage and harm. And so we'll branch that in a minute. So the starting point is always, well, what's it empty of? Are we saying this doesn't exist? And we don't say phenomena doesn't exist. Right? We say that the cup itself is empty of any inherent reality. Where's the cup, right? So we all know the cup is a mental construct. My idea is a cup, that's a label. This is ceramic, it's a bunch of things, it's in a shape, it's got a little handle. But there's no cup per se, right? That's a label, that's a word, it's an idea, it's a construct, a mental construct. So that only exists where? My mind, in a mental activity. There's something here though. And that's kind of the key. We're going to get to that is that we're not saying that nothing exists. We're saying that nothing is independent of anything else to start with. It's a good starting point. Interdependent. The cup's dependent upon, right, the materials that were made and the people who made it, and all the things binding together just so. And if there weren't that clay that was in the earth that could be done, there'd be no cup. And so it's all interdependent. And me seeing it as a cup is only labeled by the language that I was taught. Somebody taught me that's a cup, and if there's no handle on it, maybe it's a vase, I don't know. But it's an interdependent piece of phenomena. And everything exists interdependent, right? Nothing can exist without dependence upon something else. And all these causes and conditions that give rise to everything that we have, table, body, clothes. I know, I can go on. But if we want to understand it, what we want to do is our mind wants to say that's a cup and it's separate from anything else, when in fact that's not true. But it sure seems to be true. And we harden that, we put a label on it, it becomes a cup, and it becomes my favorite cup. And suddenly somebody steals my cup and I'm angry over that cup. And all that's a big story. It's all a big story. So first off, we want to know how things exist, and the nature of Buddhism is really that. The only interest Buddhism really has in all of these teachings, its ultimate goal, is for us to know the truth. And that's, I really find, a liberating feature in Buddhism. Let's just know what's true. You want to hook up scientists and whatever, let's go after it. Let's challenge this stuff. Let's see what's true. And so, one thing that's true, I think we can find, is that everything is dependent upon. Everything only exists in dependence upon. Everything is interrelated. There's nothing that exists independent of any other phenomena. So this is where they crack the door. Right? So we start with, it is empty of. It's empty of independent existence. There is no separate cup in the world. Good? And if anyone has questions as we go. In the Heart Sutra, the Buddha says that emptiness is beyond words or expression or thought. What this means is that emptiness cannot be talked about directly, but only in relation to something else. Emptiness and phenomena are inseparable. And to discuss emptiness at all, one must use examples from the world of phenomena. When we watch a wave, for example, we can see that it is not independent from the ocean, and that it really has no true separate nature. In the same way, other phenomena, no matter how distinctly they seem to exist, do so only in the same way as the wave. That is, in relation to a complex interplay of causes and conditions. Therefore, Buddhism teaches that nothing exists inherently, right? Inherently, on its own, independent. To begin to develop a conceptual understanding of emptiness, we must first develop the suspicion that the manner in which we perceive the world is not necessarily the way the world is. When we see an object such as a car, we at first perceive it as distinctly separate from the world. But when we examine it more closely, we find that this separateness begins to fade. We realize that we need to take into account the leather seats that were once skins on live animals, the rubber tires that were living plants, the metal that came from inside the earth that we are walking on, the factory where it was made, the machine that fashioned it, the people who earn a living from its production. In fact, when we subject it to analysis, we realize that the number of influences that have come together to create what we call a car are practically infinite. We cannot really exclude it from the environment from which it was formed. Once we fully realize this, we still see the car. But its meaning for us has changed, and it seems less solid. According to this view, there is not even a single atom in the universe that has an independent existence. Every object and every event is part of the picture and exists relative to everything else. In fact, the theory of relativity has much in common with shunyata. I'm pausing. Okay. So they threw in a different word. We have the interdependence, the sort of the materials that come together. But there's also causes and conditions, right, that give rise to things, right? So things are dependent not just in terms of material form, but causes and conditions, right? Sun, water, air that we breathe. Without air breathed, this would be a short discussion. So there's and this phenomena exists in many layers, and causes and conditions that give rise, and things are always independent upon in relation to other things. So another way that I often present the world to understand its nature and soften that objective view of things is that we are always having a subjective experience, right? However you see this room, the person next to you may see it a little differently. We hear things a little differently. If I'm tired today, I'm experiencing things a little different than when I'm more alert. It's all subjective, right? So that's a little helpful piece. Once we are used to seeing objects this way, we can begin to see the emptiness in our subjective states. We take this understanding from things outside us to things inside us. From mountains and raindrops to our fears and anger. From oceans and stars to our personalities. From weather systems to our loves and our hates. This doesn't mean that we don't have emotions, but we recognize their relative nature. Western Buddhists sometimes interpret these teachings as a call to seriousness, a negation of personality, whereas most Tibetan Buddhist teachers express emotion fully and spontaneously, but not very seriously. For they have learned the most profound lesson of all, the emptiness of self. So they're starting to take us more inward when we start to realize that just as the events that I experience are subjective and relative and independent upon things, so are my thoughts and feelings and emotions. So they're independent upon things, and they're fluid. And there's no inherent existent in my anger. You know, where's my anger exist? You know, it's in my mind, it affects my body, but it's transitory. And there's no one thing that'll give the same amount of anger as something else. And so we start to realize that there's some space here for movement. I'm not angry. I'm experiencing some anger. It's not who I am. And it's in relation to me really grabbing onto something that exists firmly, solidly. Ultimately, the hypothesis that we want to challenge, that we want to test, is that if I saw clearly, there would be no anger. For anger or any mental affliction is dependent upon misperceiving the nature of reality. Who is it that's getting angry anyway? So they're very skillfully kind of taking us into this path a bit. And the idea when we work with emptiness and the nature of reality is to stay away, and they're going to come to this, I don't want to go too far, is to stay away from the things that nothing matters, because it all matters. But our experience of everything is a subjective one. And if we can start to crack the door just a little bit, and we have whole genres now of science that are really explaining this very well too. The fluid nature, the things that change, the interrelationship of things, the transformative value, even in our neural pathways that we can change, that I can start altering my experience by simply changing one thing, right? One thing you can change that will totally change your experience of anything at all time. What's that one thing? Well, it's your mind, but what is it that we do?
The way we think?
Sort of, yeah. Our attitude. Yeah. You take a different perspective on any event, you will change your experience of it. A different attitude. So, Aaron and I were talking earlier about one of the favorite quotes that we have is, you know, to try to greet everyone you meet as though it's their last day. How would that change your experience of that person? Even if you didn't like that person, suddenly it changes. We see them differently. You know, anything that we think about, you know, whether it's some piece of bad luck that we've had, and then we can bring our mind to, you know, how much that can help us grow in some way. Now it's an opportunity to grow. The only thing between, you know, a tragedy and an opportunity to grow is often the way I look at it, right? You change your attitude about anything, it shifts the experience of everything. So you'll start to see how this very fluid, subjective nature of the world that we live in. But we don't tend to think that way, right? They're an idiot, they're fun, this tastes great, you know, that's wonderful, and, well, you know, is it Saturday yet? Because I'm going to have fun then. And that's all this very objective world out there. And when we objectify and reify all of that, and then that conditions us, and then our reactive states, anger, resentment, jealousy, frustration, all that, arise in dependence upon how we see those things as very real and very measurable and objective. When that's not the way they exist at all. Easier said than done, though, isn't it? That's why it's a path. It's a path. You just crack the door. And I like little things that crack the door. And one thing that, you know, we had that as a practice one week was just try to change our attitude during the week about things and just see what happens. And those of you that did, you started to notice, wow, everything changed. That jerk I sit next to became a human being. It was odd. As we begin to become aware of the subtle interrelationship between our consciousness and what we call reality by taking a look at how our mental labels create our experience. Oh, we can begin, not when we can begin. Where does one thing end and another begin? if you take apart a car piece by piece, take apart a car piece by piece, at what point can you no longer call it a car? Right? When does it stop being a car? Where does music end and your experience of it begin? Where does your happiness end and another's begin? Our perpetual consciousness also plays an important role in isolating things from their environment by providing us with a visual outline. This outline becomes the basis for separation. The outline of a cat becomes a cat. The outline of a table becomes a table. Apart from our visual perception, our emotional perception also contributes to the view of things as separately existing entities. The emotional value we place on things further emphasizes their independent reality for us. All of these factors combine to form our ordinary view of the universe. We do not literally create the phenomenal world with our minds, but we do create an experience of separately existing objects and events that then becomes our reality. I'm just going to pause there for just a moment and try to keep my thumb on. So a lot of people say you create your own reality, and that's true. But it doesn't mean I created you. It doesn't mean you don't exist. What I'm really creating is my experience of you, how I perceive you, whether you're a jerk or not. Whether you're a jerk or not has much less to do with you and much more to do with me. Because someone else likes you, even though I may think you're a jerk. Some people even think I'm a jerk. I know, it's shocking. The reason I always make a point of saying that there are no annoying people is because some people think I am. So I like to remind them it's not true. Right? We feel annoyed, but the person in themselves are not annoying. We just would like them to be different. So here what they're kind of piecing together is, so we see the cat, we see outlines, we attach the labels, and then our emotions and things, apply that, like my favorite cup, my favorite cat. Have you ever noticed how many of the world's greatest babies there are in the world? It's shocking. It's hard to keep track. World's best grandfathers and so forth, and things that we do, and we grab onto these things, and they're so precious, and they're so wonderful, and it's the label, and it's these exaggerated qualities, things existing in a particular way. But it is important to realize that we're never saying that phenomena doesn't exist. We're not saying I'm making up the world. We're saying I am actually contributing, I am ultimately how I'm experiencing the world. So we don't ever want to negate that. It doesn't mean that there aren't harmful people doing harmful things that can harm you. That's absolutely true. And some people get confused like that. I'm not making that up when somebody's hit me with a baseball bat. It hurts. And that's real. And there's no way to negate that, nor are they trying to. So there is phenomena, there is this world we live in. How we experience it, though, is only through our own lens. And it's a very subjective lens. And we create that experience. Buddhist teachings propose, however, that this conception of reality is merely a habit, built up from lifetimes of conditioning and deep-rooted delusions. If we can learn to change our view, then there is an entirely different experience to be had. One which is in accord with a far more profound reality. Right? And, so we'll see what they say about that. Emptiness in the Buddhist context is often misinterpreted to mean that nothing really exists and therefore nothing matters, and that our actions have no consequences. But Buddhist texts warn against such thinking. There is a difference between nothingness and no-thingness. Right? Nothingness and no-thingness. Things certainly do exist, but they do not exist in the way we generally perceive them. That is, They do not possess an independent existence separate from everything else. In this way, our actions are far from meaningless. Their meaning is actually compounded, for their consequences reach farther than we ever imagined. I'm just going to pause on that. So that's kind of the big fear. When teachings are misinterpreted, when they're not presented accurately or properly, and people think, emptiness, it's all just emptiness, and what I do doesn't matter. Not only is the damage to yourself profound, but you have no idea how many ripples that has, because there is an interdependent world that we live in. Something happens in Afghanistan, it affects us today here in many ways, and how we smile and what impact something has. It's all interrelated. And but when we talk about the idea that how I'm perceiving the world is through my habits, my conditioning, well, the more I do anything, and the more I think things don't matter, and the more I hurt people or do harmful activities or engage in that, I am more deeply rooting that in myself. It's much more profound. And I'm going to suffer a lot more of the consequence of that behavior, because it'll be harder to liberate myself from those habits and activities. And so that's, a view on karma that we talked about before was impulses and tendencies, right? Impulses and so we have impulses, we have desires, we have tendencies, we have habits. Well, the more we do anything, what happens? They get stronger. So it's not karma's driving me to do anything. I keep reinforcing habits and tendencies and the way I react to things and redefine things, and it just gets conditioned. And that becomes my habitual nature. And I become imprisoned in my own karma. In terms of I become imprisoned by my own limited view, my own habits, my own perceptions, my labeling, the stuff that I do, and how I see somebody. And every time I see somebody that looks like that, well, they're that kind of person, and they're that kind of... And I just close myself in, and then I'm just a reactive person to whatever I see and how the world is, and we'll notice it. I mean, how many times have you ever noticed words have come out of your mouth before you've even consciously thought anything? It's, hey, how you doing? What's up? Like, what's up out of your mouth before you didn't say that. I mean, it just came out. Or, there's a lot of jokes or people start a line. I'm already saying the next line. It's just habit. And we do it. How many things do we do that we're not even aware of in a day? That's the scary part. We got in the car, we did this stuff, and yeah, we actually did bring the bag. We forgot that we brought the bag, but we did bring the bag, and I did put it in the car. But I wasn't even aware I brought the bag that I was supposed to bring, because I thought I forgot and I couldn't find it. But it's in the car where I put it. But I'm not even aware I put it there, even though I intended to. That's scary, isn't it? The kind of basic research says that we're not aware of what we're doing about half the time in the United States. Half the time we're awake. I still think that's conservative. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what they're saying here is that the danger of taking the idea that none of this matters, it's all empty of things, has profound consequences. And just if we go that route, we're really going to not only limit ourselves, we have no idea how much harm we can do to others, because everything's so interrelated. What kind of example we set to others and so forth. Very dangerous place to go, nihilism. Buddhist texts describe, at the other extreme is the idea that there is something ultimately existing, that there is some ultimately existing divine reality, and that the soul is an eternal entity. Buddhists describe these two interpretations, usually referred to as nihilism and eternalism, as the most commonly held wrong views of reality. Nihilism, or the negative extreme, negates too much, whereas eternalism, or the positive extreme, negates too little. Geshe Rabten explains the first view as clings to annihilation, and the second as clings to permanence. So this is the other view, and so that one's, it really had me wrapped up for a bit. Like if there's no eternal soul, what goes on life to life, right? I mean, got to be something. Okay, so what is it that's eternal? What's going on? And when you think about a soul, well, there's this soul, this independent thing that is going life to life, goes to heaven, goes to hell. It's this soul, but this soul doesn't change. It's something that's eternal. And Buddhism doesn't have that view at all. Buddhism says we're much more like a stream of consciousness. And that stream of consciousness from life to life to life, well, it's changing all the time. There's nothing fixed in that. What I think, do, and say now is planting seeds in that stream. And they grow, and as this body ends, the new ones evolve. But there's nothing that's permanent in there. It's all changing all the time. I'm not the same person I was even an hour ago, let alone 10 years ago. Nor will I be in the future. The stream of consciousness, its nature is empty of these qualities. There's nothing permanent within that stream of consciousness. And so it's a much more fluid concept. There's no permanent idea of John going like John's really, if he screws up this lifetime, John is really going to suffer next lifetime. Well, there won't be any John. But this consciousness will be experiencing things differently. And probably not so fun. But it won't be John, because John won't exist, as John ultimately does not exist, other than a label, and only in dependence upon you calling me John. Right?
Labeled you, John.
Yeah, I labeled John. I had the label Jong Chup Chopel before. Different label. So there's this idea then that we call it the middle way, the middle path, right? Things exist, but they don't exist the way we see them. And they exist in dependence upon other phenomenon. And there's a relationship that's going on. But everything's changing all the time. So nothing exists independently and nothing exists ultimately. And everything exists in dependence upon in relation to all other phenomena. Simple, right?
So my consciousness is not my consciousness. It's a consciousness.
Right. It's not yours. You don't get a stake in ownership in it.
Okay, my awareness is the same. It's not my awareness. It's just an awareness.
Yes, but there is an awareness that is unique in a sense of a stream of consciousness that has given rise to how you perceive yourself. But ultimately, its ultimate nature is again empty. And this is kind of one of the sort of different views. I'm trying to be polite and tactful.
Don't just say.
Okay, so a misperception about enlightenment. So people can meditate and become proficient meditators and dissolve your sense consciousness and dissolve into the nature of mind itself, your awareness. At that stage, there's no body, there's no hearing, you're just in awareness. And there's a non-dual nature experience of that. And a lot of people think that's enlightenment, and they've found it. And they teach all the time about how to be enlightened. However, when they come out of meditation, then there's John. And John's still able to get agitated and scared and whatever. And so it's really not enlightenment. What it is experiencing the nature of your mind, which is blissful, luminous, non-conceptual. And we all have that. We all have that. But one of my teachers explains it as a vacation. It is not enlightenment. And a lot of people get, really, that's their thing, and you get attached to it. And now I'm attached to something. It's actually an inhibitor. Another way he explains it is it's a timeout in a game that you're already losing. In other words, if you're in a game and you're down 90 points and you take a timeout, well, you're not losing anymore, right? Because it's an ethically neutral state. In other words, when I'm in that state of meditation, I'm not creating any more delusion or karma or things. But I'm also not getting any points either, right? So when I come out of that meditation, I'm still down 90 points. So if we start to, when we think about the stream of consciousness, the awareness, your awareness, that is the imprint of your imprints of karma and klesha. That's this river, and it's uniquely the one that gave rise to your experience. Ultimately, though, is once you've reached the ability to have that stability in meditation, to be at the nature of mind, then you turn your mind towards vipassana. Then you turn your mind towards the nature of how things actually exist with that power of attentiveness and mind, and you pierce through even that basic nature of mind, the bhavanga, the ground of becoming, and you realize the nature of not one, not more, no beginning, no end. That is how things are. And there is no concept of you anymore. That's enlightenment, the big E. Little e, the other stuff. So they have, little e's. And we don't want to discard that, because when people use the little e, what they're using is some experience of a non-dual nature of reality, which is a realization, which is nice. And it's not nothing. But if you think it's the only thing, in terms of those moments, you're not quite there yet. Does that help? So it goes right through the actual, even the stream. We cut right through the nature of mind. And there is no Stephanie. And there's nothing to give rise to Stephanie. There's no more ground of becoming. There's no more ground of becoming.
At that point, would you say that all consciousnesses are the same in nature?
They're not one, not more.
Okay. Yeah.
Their nature is no different.
Right. Okay. So there's no more individual consciousness at that point. It's
Not one, not more.
okay.
It's beyond concept, so it's one of those things we keep wanting to try to put a label on it, but no beginning, no end, no coming, no going, not one, not more. It's his Rigpa, it's the nature of the ground of things, that experience. There's no time there. There's no time. Fourth time. So that's where they start. But in order to get there, we need a bridge. We need a thing. So, and here's the thing, so we obviously, we start and we go, well, what's that? Well, and then it's like, well, I can't explain that. So, well, how do we know that's worth even striving for? And that's where I think it's important to come back and go, okay, let's try this. We have a working hypothesis. The working hypothesis is that all of my mental afflictions are a result of me misperceiving reality. Okay, well, I can work with that. I can try that. I can test that. I can test that if I saw this differently, would that change my experience? If I understood that the nature of reality is a little more subjective, would I be as angry, if I recognize that person's not a jerk 24 hours a day, would I be a little more accepting? And so what we do is we start exploring, trying to see things a little more accurately and see if that reduces my mental afflictions. Okay? And then we make steps, because nothing here is about faith, blind faith. Everything here is about experimentation and testing, and see if you develop a faith that's born out of experience, not out of somebody told me so. So it's going to be hard to see that, but can we see that there's a path and a method to try things, to see how that works out? And what will happen, the experience on the path is that as our behavior on the path, recognizing the interdependence of things, the empty nature of things, the subjective experience of things, we become much more able to change my perspective of what's happening and noticing how, I was so worked up over that yesterday, and now it's just Tuesday, right? But boy, I was pretty worked up about that, and it's Tuesday. How many things in our life have we been worked up over, and then it was Tuesday, and then I was happy again? And how many times I have so many joys and things go exactly the way I had this sense pleasure and things that are wonderful, and then I was pissed off the next Tuesday. This cycle. And it's all contingent upon how I reify and make this so important and lasting and firm and concrete. So we can start testing it. We start saying, well, let's just see if I try to bring more actual reality, not happy thoughts, not positive, not perky thoughts, as Alan likes to say. You don't even have to think perky thoughts. Let's just think real thoughts, right? When I'm really angry and upset because somebody talked to me a particular way, right? How dare they? I'm focused on one thought, that one way one person treated me. Well, let's expand. How many people have been kind to me throughout my lifetime? How many people have honored me and fed me and cared for me? How many, on and on and on. Well, that's a much bigger view, right, than this one person. And then if I look at why they talk to me that way, well, why did they talk to me that way? Is it because I'm a jerk? Or is it maybe because they're having a bad day, or maybe they're suffering, or maybe they're struggling in something?
Or did they even talk to you that way?
Yeah, or did they even talk to me that way, right? Maybe
That's
I
really
was a little
common.
irritable.
If you're close to somebody who talks to you a certain way,
Yeah.
and you want to get to the bottom of it or have more honest communication, and you go to them and say, hey, when you said, like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like, they have no idea, literally, because it's just a fabrication.
Right.
I have experienced that,
Yes.
at least.
I'm sure we all have.
So there's no, there is no that way that person talks. It's
Right.
perception.
Yeah. So perception in that.
Misperception.
And even if somebody did yell at me,
Right.
intentionally, on purpose, how many times is that a misunderstanding? And then if they do it, how much is it because they're angry or they're frustrated or whatever? But even in the bigger picture, somebody angry, somebody does this, and how many people have helped me in that same day? How many thousand of things are going right for me that I'm not even thinking about? And how much can I be totally content and happy right now in this moment? And then Shannon tells me about the chocolate with caramel and sea salt dessert in the back of the room. And I'm thinking, boy, I'm hungry. When's this talk going to be over? And now I'm suffering. I was content until she told me about the chocolate with caramel, sea salt, in a plastic tub back there by the refrigerator. Didn't know about it, totally content. Now I know about it. Because I know that'll provide me some lasting happiness. For a minute or two. And then what happens? Another desire. So you can see how the mind reifies, grasps, and really seeks out constantly these things. So when we talk about, here's this path that you can actually be free of karma. And that's really the path of Buddhism, to be liberated from karma. Karma is what limits my view. It is the layer, the lens that confines my ability to see things as they are. The habits and the tendencies that trap me. My habitual way of seeing things as independent and separate and the cause of my happiness or suffering. That is what we want to start. So we want to start unpacking that. And so while in some ways we can't conceive of not one, not more, it's beyond concept. It's funny how much, I'll have a conversation, well, it's beyond concept, and say, well, what about this? Well, it's still beyond concept, but our mind wants to put a label on it, and we want to understand it, because we have a conceptual mind we're working with. And it's only beyond that conceptual mind, so the nature of mind in its non-conceptual state, that we can really direct our attention. So, as the old saying goes, how's it go? It's so old I can't remember it. I'm going to paraphrase. I'm going to phrase it differently because I can't nail it. But it's not explainable, but it's knowable, right? There's no word, but it's not. Yeah. So I can't explain it, but it's knowable. So it is something you can know. It's something you can experience. You can determinately do that, and many have done it. And there is a path, and it's clear. And in order to engage in that path, though, we need some experience ourselves, and we need to make sure it's worthwhile and it makes sense. And that's why it's so important to put into practice some of these principles and just start seeing, well, if I start bringing more reality into my environment, will I have less mental afflictions? Or when I make sure that that person's really a jerk, will I be pissed off every time I see them? And are they really a jerk? We explore these things. So there's nothing fixed that's going life to life. And there's not nothing that's going life to life. Right? There's a stream. And everything's a stream, right? Today's different than yesterday. We were flowing. The idea in meditation that we can do is we can actually get out of the water and observe the stream. Right now, everything's water. We only know water, how everything appears. Like fish. They only know water. You get out of the water, watch what a fish does. You know, it's a whole different thing. And likewise, it's a whole different thing when we start seeing that it's water. It's habit, it's conditioning. It's really not a car. A car's in my mind. Clear, right? Okay. An intellectual understanding of the true meaning of emptiness is only the beginning. However, for to incorporate and fully realize the profundity of this view of reality is at least a lifetime's work. The implications of the philosophy of emptiness are truly enormous and can utterly transform how we view ourselves and those around us. We first become aware of a myriad of influences that affect our actions and how we are the direct product of these influences. So we get to observe that. I mean, that's really what mindfulness practice is. Mindfulness is this clear observation of these influences, my afflictive angers, my motivations, and how I keep responding, these patterns and habits that come. When we extend this insight to other people, we begin to develop a greater understanding and tolerance of their situations as we learn that they too are under the sway of a vast network of forces that we can barely begin to comprehend. The Dalai Lama has said, when we consider that everything we experience results from a complex interplay of causes and conditions, we find that there is no single thing to desire or to resent. And it is more difficult for the afflictions of attachment or anger to rise.
Just say that again.
Yeah. So when we really understand that everything we experience comes from a complex interplay of causes and conditions, right? Everything. My cup, the tea, all that. We find that there's no single thing to desire or resent. And it is more difficult for afflictions of attachment or anger to arise. Because we get really hung up because they did that thing, right? But that thing was the cause of a lot of things. And why did they do that thing? What are the conditions that gave rise to that thing? And you know, I usually use the analogy of a game, like a basketball game, right? He gave the game-winning shot. Well, that game-winning shot wouldn't have mattered without the other 90 points, right? What's the game-winning shot? You know, and likewise, everything. There's no, you know, all the things that came to this. But we think that one thing. But there's a lot of, and then I love it when people say, well, you know, it happened for a reason. Well, yeah. I bet there's a cause for everything that happened. There's, no big spiritual mastery here. Of course it happened for a reason, you know. Like everything happens for a reason. There's a cause. And we recognize that there's a cause for that. And the cause for it isn't just that one person doing that one thing. It's the whole environment that that person grew up in, and the abuse that they've had, and the neglect, and the fears, and the insecurities, and the environment, and all of these things that gave rise to that person doing that one thing. And we look at the one thing and we say, that's the thing that pissed me off. You can't, when you realize the whole vast interplay, you don't get so pissed off. Because you realize.
But you're still affected by it.
Can be. Or you're less affected by it. Because when you see it more clearly as a myriad of experiences, then there's not going to be the bite. There's not going to be the hook. They did that to me. No, they didn't do that to me. Think how many things and people were involved that gave rise to a moment where someone out of fear or frustration did the best they could do at a given moment and acted in anger. And I took it personally, grasping to John that exists in a particular way. When you see it more in that fuller view, we just see that, it's the nature of things. And what matters is how do I respond? Because this event just gave me the opportunity to cultivate a higher potential. And that's a whole different experience. Easier said than done, but doable. Doable. Again, all this takes practice. It really takes that mindfulness of observing these habits, tendencies, labeling, how things appear. I think they're going to get to labels. We're good though, right? Any questions? Yes.
Yeah.
What's your name, by the way?
Will.
Will, okay.
This concept of value is really confusing to me, and I guess I'll ask the question.
Mm-hmm.
In your personal experience, obviously you value things.
Mm-hmm.
See that you're married. You value relationships, possibly inanimate objects. I mean, you created this room.
Well, my wife did. But
Okay. So,
along with a lot of other causes and conditions, but yeah.
how do you embrace in your life? How do you embrace value without just? I mean, I just feel like you're setting yourself up for disappointment. And I understand how you explained. Well, so many of us are people, have extreme personalities, whether nothing matters,
Mm-hmm.
and there is some sort of freedom to that, but it's very short-lived because why would I wake up in the morning?
Right.
So I mean, when it comes to things that you truly value,
Mm-hmm.
how do you hold on to those, but then not let
Yeah, the holding on is the problem.
the domino effect, affect everything else?
Yeah. So in order to truly value something, you need to not be attached to it.
So you're saying you're not attached to your wife?
No. I try not to be.
You try.
That's the source of all suffering. If you truly love someone, so love is a free thing. There's no pain in love. There's a lot of pain in attachment.
Right.
So attachment is some sort of misperception that that thing's going to give me some type of pleasure or joy, and it can't. When I love my wife, that means I want the very best for her, whether or not that means she's in my life or not. That's how you can actually value someone, is to have their highest potentials in your heart and to be able to be willing to extend yourself for their ultimate good. So when I love my wife, I really hope I'm not attached, because that would lessen any ability for me to truly be there for her in ways that I'd like to. Attachment is about what she can do for me.
Right.
And that's a very self-centered, self-serving, limiting view of love or of anything that we value.
But we so define ourselves by, our values,
Yeah.
right? And whether it's objects or ideas or the Constitution, I don't know.
Yeah.
But if I hold on too tight to any of those things, I'm just setting myself up for.
No, again, let's get back with terminology. So we teach basically that you're going to find a lot more inner peace, well-being, genuine happiness in life by living in alignment with your values or ethics, right? And that's something that's worthy. And our motivation, having a strong motivation to be a kind person, to be a loving person. These are values. And those are important to hang on to and guide us. And they don't limit us. So it's different from, valuing my house, because then there's, again, attachment that gives rise. And if I have a value of compassion, guiding, I want to remove suffering to the best I can, and that's my guiding principle, there's really going to be hard to find a problem with that. But if my value is my degree on the wall and how others see me, I'm going to be in a lot of trouble. So valuing stuff is no problem. The perception or hanging on to something can be problematic. So for example, a Dharma center, let's go back to your analogy here. I would like to use my life in the most beneficial way to help the most amount of people and to achieve enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. Good value, good motivation, I'm on that. If I'm attached to being a Buddhist teacher and having people come listen, boy, there's a lot of suffering going to happen. And life's going to show up and take many forms. And we need to constantly be guided by our values to ask, what's the most beneficial thing to do in this situation, given my values? And that doesn't go wrong.
I like that. I like the relationship between attachment and value.
Yeah.
Do I I would say, is it a value, or do I consider it a value to come here and listen?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I do. But is it if you're sick,
Yeah.
and it doesn't happen
Right.
next Wednesday, and my Wednesday's ruined, that's attachment.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And it's not about...
It's gone out the window there.
People do that. The Dalai Lama gets sick, can't give a teaching. People are crushed. Well, hey, let's do some prayers for the Dalai Lama that he gets better. You know? He ruined my day, you know? And, it's me. And that becomes, a problem. So attachment is the source of this suffering. And the attachment's always based in the misperception of something. And how much joy or how much happiness it can give it. It can't. And so... if you like a Dharma center, whether this goes or doesn't go or whatever, there's a lot of causing I have no power over. If my house gets blown down tomorrow, whatever. What we'll find is that we have all had tragedy. We've all had things go. We've lost things broken, things we cared for. People broke our hearts and left. But we've been able to move on. The thing that gives us the resiliency to move on is our values. It's our meaning. It's our purpose. And that's our source of strength, not the outer conditions. But that doesn't mean you can't value some good, conducive environment for which to do your practice. But it could be swept away. It's the attachment. Simply put, if you want to remove all stress in your life, just let go of attachment to outcomes. Easier said than done. Yeah, at some point you can realize that the outcomes never matter. What matters is the effort. I mean, that's where it all is. But again, mindfulness observes that. So that's a really good question. I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the, when we give talks, people like to debate. Monks love to debate. I like it a little bit. Not attached to it. But they always say, there's always that little gotcha person. Well, they say in the Buddhism that, desire is the source of all suffering, And what about desiring enlightenment, And they think they got you, but they don't understand. Actually, the source of suffering is misperception, which gives rise to a misperceived, unwise attachment or desire to something that can't provide you with any meaning or purpose. The label of desire or greed or attachment in that context of the three poisons is based on a misperceiving thing, whereas you can have healthy desire of compassion, healthy desire to benefit all beings, and so forth. And if it's based in reality, it can be very helpful and be the driving force for change. But it too can be problematic, right? Because I can be Joe Compassion, and I'm going to save everybody, and then when they're not doing the things I want them to do, I can get angry, and don't they know I'm trying to help them? And so again, it's got to be based in reality. And so desire, motivation. I mean, when we started this talk, I asked you to set a motivation, an intention, a meaning, a purpose, a desire, an aspiration. That guides us. I get up in the morning. Got to have purpose and meaning to life. This life is not coming again. This day is not coming again.
But I have to make sure that I'm not attached to that desire.
Right. Well,
It's just like like what you just said,
again.
the pleasures and wanting, not the having, right?
Yeah.
So,
But again, I just want to get technical with the word attach. When we're using the word attach, it's based in delusion. But you can have a bone to the heart filled, fierce desire to free all living beings and to have that be your driving force to get up every single day. And that's ultimately something we work to cultivate. It's not attached, but it is fiercely motivated and willing to endure incredible pain for it.
That's what you're talking about, the attachment to the outcome. It's so
Yeah.
like you can have that fierce desire and that's good.
Yeah.
That's beneficial, but you can't be attached to actually accomplishing that. Like you know what I mean?
Or that things go the way you'd
that-
like them to.
Right,
Yeah.
but I'm actually going to free every single human being from, suffering and delusion. You can't be attached to the outcome that, like all the 7 billion plus people on Earth that you're.
That's just the fragment. And there's all the other beings and
the other
animals
beings
and
all
other
that.
planets.
Of course,
Yeah.
that's,
Yeah.
and so that's the problem with the attachment to outcome right there. I mean, it's not, and even I would think like that, what you were saying about enlightenment, it could be trappy, just because compassion, it seems like if you have this desire to be a compassionate person, you can renew it moment by moment, but like, the big E, like if you don't want to settle for the little e, then the big E, the big enlightenment, it just becomes some other achievement or some kind of outcome
Mm-hmm.
that you would want to attain, and like you wouldn't have the moments of the process, which are actually
Yeah, you can get too
Not bad.
fixated on that, and it actually inhibits your ability to progress on the path. Yeah.
I would think.
Yeah, you need to start where you are, but also, the idea of becoming enlightened, well, we got lots of lifetimes, but, we always say try to do it, as quick as possible, but don't kick back. But at the same time, right, when they teach meditation, the pith instructions are to abandon all hope and fear. In other words, when I sit down, we don't know what's going to happen. But I can be fiercely dedicated to following the directions of the instructions of the meditation. Whether my mind's all over the place, whether it's not, whether I get this feeling, that doesn't matter. What matters is I'm following the direction. And that I have some power over. Abandon all hope and fear. So, we'll see what happens. I could die tomorrow. But I also can be fiercely dedicated to living this day in a very meaningful way, whether or not it comes out the way I thought. Because we don't know how it'll turn out, do we? No.
Absolutely not.
No. Yeah. Yeah, that's good. And that's good. So we cleared up a couple common myths, and one of them is that, we're not supposed to have desire. You can have a healthy desire. You can be guided by your values. These are important, actually. We can't function without them, and we can't really progress either. And that's the thing, the measurement of love. It frequently gets trapped into what people are doing for me. I love them, they make me so happy. Wait a minute, I love them, they make me so happy? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, we'll do a little announcements. And I want to make sure I mark that place. Yeah, I think that they're bringing a good angle on. So we are going to have the monks have gone in Chartse Monastery here this weekend. So Friday, Saturday, and Sunday night, the monks will be here. We've been announcing it for a while. We have flyers in the back. Those of you online, zoom in. On Friday night, they'll be doing a teaching on the Great Compassion, on how to cultivate bodhicitta. On Saturday night, a Vajrasattva empowerment. And the Vajrasattva empowerment is the Buddha in which people do purification practice. So, we've gone through the 4 opponent powers, we do purification. Vajrasattva is the deity that's usually invoked. So I asked them to do that for Saturday night, and Sunday is the healing ritual and purification practice. So that's for, it's actually in the round room and in the Callaway room, but here at the 3rd Street Center. Yeah, so just come to the 3rd Street Center. All of them are at 7 o'clock. Saturday, we will have our normal Chenrei Sig practice here, our Buddha of Compassion practice, Saturday morning. I'm not sure about book study. I'll be here with a book in case anybody wants to. Yeah, and that's Saturday too. So just check our schedule, Way of Compassion Dharma Center. There's probably other announcements. I just got back, so. We'll post them or something.
If anyone can
Yeah.
help pass out flyers
Oh,
for this weekend,
thank you.
that'd be fabulous. If you want to grab a couple off the table.
Yeah, thanks, Shannon. So yeah, we didn't get a chance to post them. I just got them printed today. So if somebody wants to post them around, that would be helpful. They are going to be here in 2 days. So it'll be a precious opportunity to be with the monks once again. And I feel like there's just something else hanging out there on my head, but we'll be okay. So let's do a little dedication, dedicating the merit and virtue we've accumulated here for the benefit of all beings. Let us dedicate the merit and virtue that we've accumulated both here today and throughout our lifetimes, both individually and collectively. We dedicate it for the benefit of all beings. May all beings be free of suffering and find lasting happiness, and may we be able to use the merit and wisdom we've accumulated to purify our own minds, to cultivate our path to enlightenment, to truly be of benefit to all beings. All right, thank you all so much. Always a joy and an honor